I started seeing a guy who seemed perfect at first, but now everything he does irritates me. I feel like his mother, and I'm scared I'm going to snap. How do I end things without completely breaking him? I'm 19, and I recently started seeing this guy, also 19, who I'll call him. We met on Hinge, and at first, everything felt easy. We clicked quickly, had good conversations, and realized we were both studying the same degree, just at different universities. It felt like one of those lucky coincidences, and I genuinely thought I liked him. We went on a few dates, and things progressed pretty naturally. Eventually, we started spending nights at each other's places, and for a while, I thought this could turn into something real. But the more time we spent together, the more I started noticing things that didn't sit right with me. It made me realize just how different we are. For context, I moved away from home right after finishing high school to study interstate. I'm currently doing a double degree in law, with a specialization in corporate and commercial law and commerce, which isn't very common where I'm from in Australia. I've been living on my own for about 2 years now, completely independent. I've always been that way. I'm the eldest daughter, raised in a household where my dad worked and my mom stayed home. But one thing my dad drilled into me from a young age was to never rely on a man for anything. He made sure I knew how to take care of myself, how to be capable, and how to stand on my own 2 feet. And I've taken that seriously. I work around 25 hours a week across 2 jobs while studying full-time. I go to the gym 3 times a week and do Pilates twice a week. I'm disciplined with my schedule, study, work, exercise, and still making time for hobbies and maintaining some kind of social life. It's not always easy, especially because I've been diagnosed with bipolar 2 and ADHD. Managing my mental health requires structure, consistency, and balance, and I've built a lifestyle that supports that. My routines aren't just preferences, they're necessary. On the other hand, lives a completely different life. He still lives at home, which I don't judge in itself. Given the economy, it's pretty normal. But what stood out to me wasn't that he lived with his parents. It was how much they still did for him. His parents handle almost everything. They wash his clothes, change his sheets, clean his room, and even take care of basic things like his towels and general upkeep. It honestly shocked me. At first, I thought maybe it was just a one-off thing or that he was exaggerating, but the more time I spent around him, the more I realized it was his normal. Even when we'd hang out, his parents were constantly checking in on him. They have Life 360 installed on his phone, and they regularly call or text asking where he is and what he's doing. He told me he's not allowed to remove the tracking app until he moves out. And he just accepts it. That's what started to bother me the most. It wasn't just that his parents were overly involved. It was that he didn't seem to have any desire to be independent. There was no urgency, no frustration, no drive to change his situation. He seemed completely comfortable being taken care of. The contrast between us became impossible to ignore. I've spent the last 2 years building a life for myself, learning how to manage everything on my own, finances, responsibilities, my mental health, my future. I've worked hard to create stability and independence, and I take pride in that. Seeing someone my age living in such a dependent way made me question whether we were even compatible. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself that everyone moves at their own pace, that maybe he just hadn't been pushed into independence yet. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about circumstances, it was about mindset. I started to feel it in small ways. The way he approached responsibilities, the lack of structure in his life, the reliance on his parents for things I consider basic. It made me feel like we were in completely different stages, even though we're the same age. I went into this thinking I had found someone I connected with. And in some ways, I did. But the more I got to know him, the more I realized that liking someone isn't always enough. Compatibility matters, especially when your values and lifestyles are so fundamentally different. The more time I spent with them, the more things started to come to light, and not in a good way. At first, it was small things I brushed off. Preferences, habits, things I told myself weren't a big deal. But then those small things started stacking up into something I couldn't ignore anymore. He refuses to eat vegetables. Not dislikes, refuses. Like a child. I tried to laugh it off the first time, thinking maybe he was just picky, but no. He will actively avoid anything remotely green on a plate. It honestly shocked me, especially because I'm someone who's very conscious about health, routine, and balance. But that wasn't even the worst part. When he stayed over at my apartment for a few days, I started noticing his hygiene habits, or lack of them. He told me he only uses soap in the shower once a week because he doesn't like it. The rest of the time, he just rinses off. He brushes his teeth once a day, not because he thinks that's enough, but because he can't be bothered to do it more than that. And deodorant? He avoids it entirely. Apparently, roll-ons are too ticklish and aerosol sprays are too cold. I wish I was exaggerating. It got to a point where I became hyper-aware of it. Not just physically, but mentally, it started to bother me on a deeper level. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was about effort, or rather, the complete lack of it. Then there was his laptop. Every time he pulled it out to do uni work, I couldn't help but notice it was covered in crumbs, grease, and random stains. It looked like it had never been cleaned. I asked him, multiple times, why he didn't just wipe it down. His response? He didn't know how, and I should just do it for him. That was the moment I started feeling less like a partner and more like a caretaker. But what really pushed me over the edge were the everyday situations that made me realize just how dependent he actually is. One moment that stuck with me happened in my apartment building. My hands were full. I was carrying laundry down to the laundromat, and I asked him to do something incredibly simple. All he had to do was tap my keycard on the elevator reader and press level 4. That's it. The system is exactly like a hotel keycard. We had used it multiple times already, and I had shown him how it worked more than once. But instead of tapping the card on the reader, he started hovering it in random places, then actually tapped it against the button for level 4 instead. I tried to calmly explain it again, step by step, but he just wasn't getting it. Eventually, I gave up and asked him to hold the laundry, so I could do it myself. He just laughed, saying he didn't know what he was doing or even how to hold everything. When I handed it to him, he dropped it on the floor of the elevator. That moment, something shifted in me. It wasn't funny. It wasn't cute. It was exhausting. Another time, I asked him to turn on the shower while I finished making the bed. 5 minutes later, he called out saying there was no hot water. When I walked in to check, I saw he had only turned on the cold tap. When I asked why, he said he didn't know how it worked. This is despite the fact that I had literally turned it on in front of him before. At that point, I just stood there, staring, trying to process how someone my age could be so completely incapable of handling basic, everyday tasks. It wasn't about intelligence, it was about effort, awareness, and independence. And that's when it really hit me. I didn't feel like I was dating him. I felt like I was looking after him. Every interaction started to feel draining. Every "I don't know how" or "you do it" chipped away at whatever attraction I had in the beginning. I found myself getting irritated over things that, in any other situation, would seem minor. But in this context, they weren't minor. They were constant reminders of how incompatible we are. I've spent years building independence, discipline, and structure in my life, not just because I want to, but because I need to. My mental health depends on it. My future depends on it. And being around someone who lacks all of that and doesn't even seem interested in developing it made me realize something I couldn't ignore anymore. As if all of that wasn't already enough, there were still more things that started to wear me down the longer I spent time with them. One of the most frustrating habits was the way he constantly spoke to me in a baby voice. At first, I thought it was a joke, something he'd drop once I made it clear I didn't like it. But even after I told him, seriously and multiple times, that it bothered me, he just kept doing it. It wasn't occasional either. It became frequent enough that I started dreading conversations because I never knew when he'd slip into it again. And it didn't stop there. He cries. A lot. Now, I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with being emotional or expressive. I actually think it's important. But with him, it felt constant and overwhelming. Every time I tried to have a serious conversation about how I was feeling, especially when I brought up the fact that I felt more like his mother than his partner, he would immediately start crying. I would try to explain calmly that a lot of the things he relied on me for were things he could figure out himself. That sometimes all it takes is a quick search, or just pausing to think through a situation. But instead of engaging in the conversation, he'd shut down emotionally. If I told him I didn't like the baby talk, he cried. If I asked him to stop calling me mummy, he cried. If I pointed out how he sometimes acted childish in public, he cried and apologized. It started to feel like I couldn't communicate anything honestly without triggering that response. And it wasn't just in serious conversations. He cried over everything. If he lost a bet or money gambling, he cried. If his sports team lost, he cried. It reached a point where I felt emotionally drained just being around him, constantly anticipating the next breakdown. I found myself pulling back, not because I didn't care, but because I simply didn't have the capacity to handle that level of emotional intensity all the time. Even in more intimate aspects of the relationship, things fell off. Physically, there was attraction. I won't deny that. But even then, it didn't take long for things to feel disconnected. The way he spoke during those moments felt unnatural, like he was copying something rather than being present. It was obvious he was trying to imitate what he thought he was supposed to sound like, instead of just being himself. I tried to communicate that too. I told him I'd rather he just be genuine, say what he actually feels instead of performing. And once again, the response was the same. He got emotional, apologized, and nothing really changed. At some point, I started to realize that this wasn't about isolated habits or quirks anymore. It was a pattern. Every attempt at communication led to the same outcome. Every concern I raised turned into me managing his emotions instead of addressing the issue itself. And that's when it became undeniable. I wasn't in a relationship where we were growing together. I was in a situation where I was constantly adjusting, constantly explaining, constantly holding things together, while he remained exactly the same. It left me feeling drained, frustrated, and honestly disconnected. At this point, I've started to notice something that honestly worries me more than anything else. Every time I'm around him, I feel irritated. Not just slightly annoyed, but deeply, constantly irritated. It's like every little thing he does, his voice, his habits, the way he acts, just gets under my skin. And I hate that feeling. I'm not an explosive person by nature, but I can feel this pressure building up inside me, like if I keep spending time with him, I'm eventually going to snap and say something I can't take back. And that's the last thing I want. Because I've been on the other side of that before. I've been a person who could tell that someone didn't actually like me, but instead of being honest, they became cold, dismissive, or outright mean. I've been ghosted, ignored, and spoken to in ways that made me question myself. I know how much that hurts, and I would never want to do that to someone else, especially not someone who, at the end of the day, hasn't done anything malicious. That's what makes this so hard. It's not that he's a bad person. He's not. He's kind, emotional, and clearly cares about me in his own way. But the truth is, I don't like being around him anymore. And the more I try to push through it, the worse it gets. The irritation isn't fading, it's growing. And I can feel myself getting closer to a point where I might lash out, not because I want to hurt him, but because I've ignored my own feelings for too long. I don't want it to get to that point. I've also realized that I've never actually had to be the one to end things before. I don't know what the right way to do this is. I don't know how to say what I'm feeling without hurting him, especially knowing how sensitive he is. Every time I imagine the conversation, I picture him crying, apologizing, and promising to change, and that makes it even harder because I know I don't want to stay, regardless of what he says. That's the part I've had to be honest with myself about. This isn't something that can be fixed with small adjustments or conversations. It's not just one issue, it's a fundamental incompatibility. Our lifestyles, our values, our levels of independence, even the way we communicate, they don't align. And no matter how much I try to be patient or understanding, that reality doesn't change. So now I'm at a point where I know I need to end things. Not because I hate him, and not because he's done something unforgivable, but because staying would be unfair to both of us. It would be unfair to him to be with someone who feels constantly irritated and disconnected, and it would be unfair to me to keep forcing myself into a situation that doesn't feel right. What I want, more than anything, is to do this in the kindest, least hurtful way possible. I don't want to ghost him. I don't want to snap at him, or let my frustration come out in a way that damages him. I want to be honest but gentle, clear but respectful. I think the only way to do that is to keep it simple and take responsibility for my own feelings. To tell him that I've realized we're not compatible, that I don't feel the connection I thought I did, and that it's not something he's done wrong. It's just that we're not the right fit for each other. I know it's still going to hurt him. There's no way around that. But I also know that dragging it out, pretending, or waiting until I explode would hurt him a lot more. So, as difficult as it is, I think the kindest thing I can do for both of us is to be honest now before things get worse. Any advice or suggestion would be appreciated.